Let's dig a little bit deeper into the issue of racial profiling. Professor Tricia Rose, the director for the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America at Brown University, joining us now. Professor Rose, thank you so much. Initially, I would like your reaction to the Attorney General's announcement here. This will affect federal law enforcement, but not local law enforcement. And that's really what we're seeing as the focus of the problem right now. Will this make an impact?
Well, I think it always matters when the federal government sets a set of guidelines that expands the opportunity and the requirements for equal treatment under the law. Of course, African Americans have long had to plead to the federal government for protection and for for acts and the like that do extend those rights. At the same time, there's always been a significant gap between federal sort of legal expectations and local and state and municipal and county operations. So that gap may still continue, but with this expanded law and expanded terms with greater data, more legal cases can be brought to bear on unjust situations. Right now, there's very little data and a very loose kind of set of guidelines.
Well, there is no question that this is an expansion, but some might also say, look, this is a little bit of political posturing. We've already had some safeguards in place. Any concerns that that's what this really is?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there should be always some concerns that there's political posturing going on when we're talking about politicians. I mean, that's their first job, is to posture. But at the same time, I think it's important that things like groups like women, people of color, queer constituencies, transgendered people, and Muslims, for example, as a religious group, face a lot of persecution and a lot of profiling that doesn't go discussed in this conversation. So I think it's important to think about how various categories of vulnerability, disregard, fear, and anxiety generate a kind of profiling that, when in the hands of those given legal rights to basically assault you and search you and control and detain you, matters a great deal.
You're talking about stop and frisk there is what you're alluding to. What is the long-term implication of policies like stop and frisk?
Well, stop and frisk is one very specific policy that articulates the larger picture of racial profiling. So you can profile people without stopping and frisk them. You can profile people in cars. You can profile kids in school. Some people argue that young African American students face a certain kind of profiling in the classroom when it comes to punishment. So profiling is a bigger category. Stop and frisk is a New York City policy that has detained nearly every young person of color in a certain age group between, say, 16 and 20. It's just been a devastating policy of psychological harassment, emotional terrorism. I mean, the fact that it hasn't yielded almost anything in terms of drug or gun or gang-related, arrests of value, it has terrorized the whole community. And more importantly, it has also helped the community see itself as its own problem, so that young black men become the sign of the problem of the community, not its future, not its mechanism for creating a sense of opportunity and strength and support. So it's a terrible policy.
Professor Rose, I want to ask you about how all of this playing out in this country right now, the Brown, the Gardner incidents, how this is really affecting racial tensions at the broader level in our country at the moment. Where do you see it happening?
I have to tell you, I'm completely tired of this phrase racial tension. What we have is a substantial degree of existing racial inequality and discrimination. If people don't want to address that, and if they want to keep racial privilege, then we have racial tension. We don't have racial tension. People of color are not wandering around, or black people aren't saying we don't like white people, nobody wants to get along. What we're saying is we want fair and equal treatment under the law, and we want it to be protected and acknowledged and addressed. Now, that's not, to me, an issue of racial tension. So I balk at that phrase because I think it makes it sound like if we could just be nice and get along, everyone would be okay. But you know what? All that quietude got us stop and frisk, got us not only these deaths, but a much more expanded number of people who've been abused and mistreated. Right? I mean, the deaths are actually a small fraction. So to me, it's an opening of a space that we need to open up to have a serious, honest, fair, and balanced, but really tough conversation that we're not in a post-race era, we're not in a colorblind era. White privilege is dramatic and significant in every walk of life, and young African Americans face the kind of discrimination that should have gone out by the wayside 40 years ago.
Well, thank you so much for all that added insight. Professor Tricia Rose, director of the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America at Brown University. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Adam.